confidence. In our society, marriages are usually arranged by families, but theirs was a love match. I could listen endlessly to the story of how they met. They came from neighboring villages in a remote valley in the upper Swat called Shangla, and would see each other in my father's uncle's courtyard when my mother and her family visited. They glimpsed enough of each other to know that they liked one another. But for us, it is taboo to express such things. Instead, he sent her poems which she could not read. I admired his mind, she says, and me, her beauty, he laughs. There was one big problem. My two grandfathers did not get on. So when my father announced his desire to ask for my mother, Torpekai's hand, it was clear neither side would welcome the marriage. His own father said it was up to him and agreed to send a barber as a messenger, which is the traditional way we Pashtuns do this. Malik Zaheer Khan refused the proposal, but my father is a stubborn man and persuaded my grandfather to send the barber again. Zaheer Khan's hujra was a gathering place for people to talk politics, and my father was often there, so they had gotten to know each other. He made him wait 9 months, but finally agreed. My mother comes from a family of strong women as well as influential men. Her grandmother, my great-grandmother, was widowed when her children were young, and her eldest son, Zaheer Khan, was locked up because of a tribal feud with another family when he was only 9. To get him released, she walked 40 miles alone over mountains to appeal to a powerful cousin. I think my mother would do the same for us. Though she cannot read or write, my father shares everything with her, telling her about his day, the good and the bad. She teases him a lot and gives him advice about who she thinks is a genuine friend and who is not. And my father says she is always right. Most Pashtun men never do this, as sharing problems with their women is seen as weak. He even asks his wife, they say, as an insult. I see my parents happy and laughing a lot. People would see us and say we are a sweet family. My mother is very pious and prays 5 times a day, though not in the mosque, as that is only for the men. She disapproves of dancing because she says God would not like it. But she loves to decorate herself with pretty things, embroidered clothes, and golden necklaces and bangles. I think I'm a bit of a disappointment to her, as I'm so like my father and don't bother with clothes and jewels. I get bored going to the bazaar, but I love to dance behind closed doors with my school friends. Growing up, we spent most of our time with our mother. My father was out a lot as he was busy, not just with his school, but also with literary societies and jirgas, as well as trying to save the environment, trying to save our valley. My father came from a backward village, yet through education and force of personality, he made a good living for us and a name for himself. People liked to hear him talk, and I loved the evenings when guests visited. We would sit on the floor around a long plastic sheet, which my mother laid with food, and eat with our right hands, as is our custom, boiling together rice and meat. As darkness fell, we sat by the light of oil lamps, batting away the flies as our silhouettes made dancing shadows on the walls. In the summer months, there would often be thunder and lightning crashing outside, and I would crawl closer to my father's knee. I would listen rapt as he told stories of warring tribes, Pashtun leaders and saints, often through poems that he read in a melodious voice, crying sometimes as he read. Like most people in Swat, we are from the Yusufzai tribe. We Yusufzai are originally from Kandahar and are one of the biggest Pashtun tribes spread across Pakistan and Afghanistan. Our ancestors came to Swat in the 16th century from Kabul, where they helped a timid emperor win back his throne after his own tribe removed him. The emperor rewarded them with important positions in the court and army, but his friends and relatives warned him that the Yusufzai were becoming so powerful they would overthrow him. So one night, he invited all the chiefs for a banquet and set his men on them while they were eating. Around 600 chiefs were massacred. Only 2 escaped and they fled to Peshawar, along with their tribesmen. After some time, they went to visit some fellow tribes in Swat to try and win their support to return to Afghanistan. But they were so captivated by the beauty of Swat, they instead decided to stay there and forced the other tribes out. The Yusufzai divided up all the land among the male members of the tribe. It was a peculiar system called wish, under which every 5 or 10 years, all the families would swap villages and redistribute the land of the new village among the male family members, so that everyone had the chance to work on good as well as bad land. It was thought this would then keep rival clans from fighting. Villages were ruled by khans, and the common people, craftsmen and laborers, were their tenants. They had to pay them rent in kind, usually a share of their crop. They also had to help the khans form their militia by providing an armed man for every small plot of land. Each khan kept hundreds of armed men, both for feuds and to raid and loot other villages. As the Yusufzai and Swat had no ruler, there were constant feuds between the khans and even within their own families. Our men all have rifles, though these days don't walk around with them like they do in other Pashtun areas. And my great-grandfather used to tell stories of gun battles when he was a boy. In the early part of the last century, they became worried about being taken over by the British, who by then controlled most of the surrounding lands. They were also tired of the endless bloodshed, so they decided to try and find an impartial man to rule the whole area and resolve their disputes. After a couple of rulers who did not work out, in 1917, the chiefs settled on a man called Miangal Abdul Wadud as their king. We know him affectionately as Badshah Sahib, and though he was completely illiterate, he managed to bring peace to the valley. Taking a rifle away from a Pashtun is like taking away his life, so he could not disarm the tribes. Instead, he built forts on mountains all across Swat and created an army. He was recognized by the British as the head of state in 1926 and installed as wali, which is our word for ruler. He set up the first telephone system and built the first primary school and ended the Wesh system because the constant moving between villages meant no one could sell land or had any incentive to build better houses or plant fruit trees. In 1949, 2 years after the creation of Pakistan, he abdicated in favor of his elder son, Miangul Abdul Haq Zehanzeb. My father always says while Badshah Sahib brought peace, his son brought prosperity. We think of Zehanzeb's reign as a golden period in our history. He had studied in a British school in Peshawar, and perhaps because his own father was illiterate, he was passionate about schools and built many, as well as hospitals and roads. In the 1950s, he ended the system where people paid taxes to the khans. There was no freedom of expression, and if anyone criticized the wali, they could be expelled from the valley. In 1969, the year my father was born, the wali gave up power, and we became part of Pakistan's northwest frontier province, which a few years ago changed its name to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So I was born a proud daughter of Pakistan. Though like all Swatis, I thought of myself first as a Swati and then Pashtun, before Pakistani. Near Osana Street, there was a family with a girl my age called Safina, and 2 boys similar in age to my brothers Babar and Basit. We all played cricket in the street or rooftops together, but I knew as we got older, the girls would be expected to stay inside. We'd be expected to cook and serve our brothers and fathers, while boys and men could roam freely in town. My mother and I could not go out without a male relative to accompany us, even if it was a 5-year-old boy. This was the tradition. I had decided very early I would not be like that. My father always said, Malala will be free as a bird. I dreamed of going to the top of Mount Elam like Alexander the Great to touch Jupiter, and even beyond the valley. But as I watched my brothers running across the roof, flying their kites and skillfully flicking the strings back and forth to cut each other's down, I wondered how free a daughter could ever be.